Welcome to episode 6 of Box Turtle Bites. I'm Jason. He's TJ. TJ, what are we doing tonight?
We're going to see if we can create an agent that explores AWS accounts.
Yeah, so I know last time we said like we are going to get off this AI thing, but honestly, it's where the fun, cool stuff is happening right now. So we decided to keep rolling with it. So yeah, I think one of this is kind of an idea that came up as we were talking through some stuff. So we do compliance work, right? Or we work for a place that does compliance work. We build some software for them. One of the things that I always thought was interesting is like how do we know when a client says this is my AWS account that's the only account that matters? So like we're gonna see if we can build a way to have an agent like go find any account that's talking to this account. So let's see what we can figure out.
Awesome.
So yeah, we got a little console app here that we're going to start playing around with again. Got some Bedrock stuff installed on here already.
Yep. And so first things we'll kind of do is set up like our main call with the Bedrock runtime. So const Bedrock. And then that will give us basically our, won't let me click the, what's it called? It lets you.
Whatever.
And so we're going to want to do a few things. We will want to set up like our message context.
And we're going to cheat a little bit here, right, to save us from having to, do all this stuff over and over again. But so we've got some stuff that we'll keep in our buffer. Keep us from having to type all this stuff on demand. Oops. So there's a tool, an API that AWS has called Cloud Control that I'm hoping we can use for some of this so that we don't have to like hook up to 20 different APIs. So we'll see how well that works when we get to that part.
So right now I'm just kind of setting up our like initial, believe it or not, this is like kind of, it almost always does this little setup. I wish they would create like a way to do it. And I'm taking out, like I just have some of this stuff.
Some repeated stuff in there.
And so
let's just rename this guy. There we go. Make that happy. Why doesn't it like Converse? Oh, is it a different client?
I don't think so.
Well, why is that unhappy?
No, it's. Oh, I used, yeah, it's the Bedrock.
Yeah. Not done. Gotcha. Yep.
So what I've kind of just spewed out there is we've got our messages. So this is the initial messages that we're going to send.
Yep.
I have a simple tool config that we'll set up. I'm basically looping over stop reason.
Yep.
And I'm saying don't stop until you give me an end turn. And if it's tool use and there's content, then basically we'll...
Yep, so that's where we'll have our code there that actually makes some calls to something. Yep.
That'll make, yep. And then one of the other things, just through, I've started using this more often, like if you get an output message, you need to push it back on
to
your messages. And so that's basically just keeping the tool use and the tool use results into play. And so like when we make our function call, we'll also want to basically return a tool use block,
Right. So
or
we'll add
tool
to that,
result block.
add
Yeah.
to that
So
message. Yep.
when we get there,
So
so
some of this is stuff that we did last time, right? And I think we're just kind of expanding on that and then kind of
Yep.
putting some more power behind it.
So we want to, I guess, like, what would we say is the prompt? We want you are an environment, AWS environment
Scanner?
scanner,
Yeah.
maybe. I probably spelt that wrong.
Yeah. I'm missing an N.
You have the ability to use, what was it called?
Cloud control?
Cloud control. You are, should we just say it's assumed it's logged into the initial?
Yeah, that's probably fine.
You are logged in with a read-only access for the AWS CLI. Use CLI commands in relation to cloud control to map any, what would you call it?
AWS accounts with access?
AWS accounts with access to the account you are logged into. And we can change this to this so it's not so long. So this is probably like, there's a first pass at a prompt, right? And so like, we're not really sure that this is going to be,
Right.
you know, the thing.
Right. And it's actually one of the things I think that's important to understand about the AI stuff, right? It's like you got to cycle through some stuff. It's different than writing software in that, like, I can look at some software and tell you, yeah, that's the right answer. That's going to work, right? But like, we need to like cycle through this, and maybe over time we get to the point where like we can just write a prompt and we just know. But it's pretty early. I think people are still trying to figure this stuff out. So like, don't be mad at yourself if you don't have this figured out yet.
And so now I'm just kind of setting up the tool that
Yep.
it can use. And so we're basically, this description is what it reads. And
Yep.
so like, it's what makes that determination. And so we're saying it's used to run AWS CLI commands to scan the cloud environment, and maybe even say with cloud control. And so the properties are, you know, the command.
Yep. I was just going to look to see what we need here.
And then probably, I'm not sure that there would be much else.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see if it can come up with stuff on its own, right? Like,
Yeah, let's just see if that's enough, right?
Right.
Like maybe that's great. And
because
so it's,
like ultimately what it's going to need to do is going to need to list resources, and then possibly it's going to need to get resource on some things to get more information, but we'll see.
yeah. So we got to define our little executor
Yep.
for this. So AWS CLI command runner.
And so basically what we're going to do, I was going to say, we're just going to straight up execute whatever they give us, right? Which obviously is a little bit dangerous and scary. It may not be the way you want to do this in a production system, but for what we're trying to prove here is like, can it even figure out how to do this? I think what would be, you know, like if I'm thinking about this, like the way I would probably ultimately do this is I'd be like, hey, look, I know how to call the cloud control. And so like,
Yeah, we could
I,
definitely.
you know, here, give me the parameters to call, right? And I'll give you the results. But But for the sake of this, it'll be interesting to see what we can get out of this.
I don't know that I want it to return this promise. I'd rather you just execute the command. If error...
You're going to want... I think you want the promise because that's how you're going to be able to get the response.
Well, this will execute it.
Yeah,
and
but
then
it's
I
gonna
get
be
back
synchronous.
that STD out.
Right, but I don't think you can get that without doing because I don't think exec is awaitable, is it?
No, so it should just run it.
Oh, it's not. Well,
And then basically I'm going to do return almost that. Except I need that there.
we'll see. I'm curious. I feel like that's not going to work right, but right, because that's going to call a command. That's what's going to happen when the command exits. So it's not actually going to return to your function. Which is where I think that promise was coming into play.
Oh, it doesn't? I thought that this...
No, because you're basically, you gave it a callback function. And that callback function is what's going to execute when that command finishes. Well, I think that's why I was doing the promise.
Okay. Let's go back.
So basically, you just need to take what you had in the standard out thing, or the thing that you were returning, and put it inside that resolve.
Yep. What was it? Why isn't it filling it out now?
You're on the reject, so.
Oh yeah, we need one other thing. Tool use ID.
Oh yeah.
So the reject, I just want to do, I forget, tool use ID, comma, content, and it is just gonna say text error.
Cool.
We don't need that part. And then on resolve will be that. And
why is it still unhappy? Oh, we just need to import that.
oh, yep.
Oops. There we go.
And so that should run the command,
Yep.
and then it'll get back, if it errors, it'll get back the error, and it'll
Right.
figure out what to do, hopefully. And otherwise, it'll get back the STD out of that command.
Yep.
And so now we got to go down here. I'm going to cheat some more because I found many little tricks of the trade. So this is a one that is very helpful. The content, believe it or not, will sometimes be an array 0 or array 1 for the tool use block. And so this helps to get you to that within the thing, which was very frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, I do remember last week when we were doing this, like feeling a little uneasy about doing index 0. So like this makes me feel less uneasy, but to that point, like, okay, what if it doesn't exist? Right. And that's why we're doing the question stuff. Right. But
oh yeah. What did we say was the property? Command.
Yep. Command and then, yeah, the tool use ID.
And then we can do const tool result equals, and this is actually Copilot failed. Oh yeah.
String, oh yeah.
I mean, technically you should guard against it,
Yep.
but a lot of this stuff you get to be kind of wild westy.
Especially when we're just doing POC, right? Like,
Yep.
we don't need to do this the perfect way.
And
so
then we want to push.
add that to the message.
Yep. And that's just going to be basically. And that'll push the tool result on. And so we basically have what you would consider an agent right
Yep.
now. Like, will this agent work? We're going to see. But we've basically set up a tool config where it can run AWS CLI commands, get back responses from AWS, and then make determinations based off of that information until it hits its end turn.
So should we do it?
Yeah, let's see what it does. I guess we didn't
we didn't output anything.
We didn't output anything. So right now it's making.
Well, we did something. We probably
Yeah, because
to say we had an error message that we output up someplace. I don't know, where are we? Where the heck did that even
command
come from?
failed. So it did AWS Cloud Control get resource -- type name AWS organization account role ARN star.
Interesting. So I'm curious how that. So if I look at AWS Cloud Control, I'm just gonna look at their API real quick.
Actually, while you're doing that, I'm gonna add some console logging so we can kind of track
Yep.
what it's like trying to do.
Get resource. So call get resource. Pass in a type name. That looks right. I wonder why it did the role ARN. Like, I think that may be where its problem ran into. Yeah, I think that's where it ran into a problem. That's actually interesting because it effectively came up with the right command, right? And that is get the resources. I'm not sure what that specific resource is, but we can figure that out. But role ARN is an optional parameter, and that one did not work. And it needs to actually be a role ARN, not just star. So.
All right, well, we got some more debugging. So what did it?
So it was right? So the AWS Cloud Control, that's good. Get resource type name is good. It passed in this optional role ARN. That's like if you want to actually have it use a specific role to make that call, which we don't want to do here, and B, if you're going to do that, it actually does need to be an actual role ARN, not just star. So it'll be interesting. Like, how do we tell it don't do that? See if that works. All right,
We got some more logging too.
Yep. Let's see what it does.
So we should see running command.
Well, hey, that worked.
So it did AWS Cloud Control list resources.
Yeah, access to 9. So this is interesting, and I think this is probably because it's trying to call something on organizations. We're not in the root account, right? So it doesn't actually have permissions on that. I don't know how to get it past that. Wonder if, like, to start, let's have it just try to find resource policies and IAM policies.
You are not in the root account. So focus on resource policies and
It actually would be IAM assume role policies.
Resource policies and IAM roles. Let's just start there and see what it does.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Well, hey, started with IAM role.
And it's looking at buckets.
which is exactly what we wanted to do, right? KMS
Looking at
keys.
KMS keys.
Yeah, like these are, and that's what I was really going to be interested. Like, does it find all the things that have resource policies? Now, what will be really interesting, and likely, I think I know the answer, at least in the short run, is anything that was added new probably isn't going to know how to get to yet.
Oh, look at that. Look at that response.
Yeah. See, that actually, that's good, because that's indicating, hey, somebody else has access to this.
Yeah, look at that. IAM role indicating cross-account access. There's a presence of the
Yep.
organization account access role. Several AWS control tower roles. So it's looking at that. It says that there's AWS SSO involved, that the CDK is being used.
Yep.
There's service-linked roles.
This is actually kind of cool. So I want to look at it's
That's
calling out a
ins-
specific account. Which account is that it called out?
I don't know how people can't see this and be like not amazed.
Right.
I mean, we literally just had an LLM,
Right.
gave it the tools, and it like did what, like, if I were describing that to a developer, I would say, go do
this. Yeah.
go do these AWS commands and like look at the roles, look at the buckets, look at the
Right.
keys, and like just like imagine the implications of this stuff.
Right. So one interesting thing here, it said with account, list off that account number. That's the account that it's in. So I'm curious, let's add to this prompt and tell it to figure out what account it's in and ignore that account. And first, I just want to see how it figures out what account it's in. Because there's an easy way to do that with the CLI. What I'm really hoping to see, this would be actually really cool, is if it's like AWS STS get caller identity, and it's like, yep, I know what account I'm in. So I'm going to look for that and see what
I'm
it
going to
does.
add a console log to do what the STD out is so that we
Yeah.
can kind of see what
Yeah,
it's looking
that's
at,
a good
right?
idea.
Because like that's even more,
Yep.
it's even more interesting. And it's one of the things that I really love about this tool calling is that if you go down at this level where the engineers are, like
Yeah.
the control and vision into this stuff is just like, wow. It's
Right.
shocking.
All right, let's see what this does. So we've added a couple things here. I should have cleared that out, but hold on. It did exactly what I told us what it should do.
Look at that.
That's incredible. Like, it just needed to do that, right? Like,
I mean, look at it. And it's
Yeah.
like looking at, I mean, we didn't have to map all of this. We didn't
Right.
have to like describe what it's going to go find and see.
yep.
Like, it's literally traversing through the AWS account right now and looking at, and I mean, I didn't even tell it to look at the KMS.
Right. And it's not, obviously it's not perfect where it's at right now, right? Like, there's some
Well,
stuff,
yeah,
there's
sure.
some improvements we need to make to this prompt
But-
to really get, but that, I mean, that's,
We've spent
I was gonna say.
15 minutes.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Like, that's the insane thing about this. Like, it would take me, like, if I had to go say, somebody who even had basic knowledge of AWS, I said, go do this, even in the console, they wouldn't have gotten this far in 15 minutes.
No way. I mean, look, I mean, some of the findings, notable findings, several control tower, CDK deployment, organizational access role, several website resources. It even found our website stack,
Yep.
several S3 buckets, and 4 KMS keys.
Yeah. So I'm going to go look at something while we're looking. I'm curious about these roles, specifically like the SSO ones, and I want to see if they've got in the trust relationship what account it is.
Well, and it also, it did say that it didn't do the trust relationships, and maybe we tell it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think what it's doing right now is just assuming, based off, it's an SSO, AWS SSO role, and it's making an assumption. So here's what's interesting. I'm looking at this. The SSO stuff is basically a federated identity connection. So then ultimately it's going to have to look at the identity provider, which it can look at. You know, what I'm trying to see here is if there's any indication, and I don't think that there is. Yeah, there's nothing that tells you definitively what account that identity provider's from, and that's fine. But when I was thinking about this, excuse me, when I was thinking about this, it's like I don't necessarily need it to find everything. The more I can find, the better. But I don't necessarily have to have it find everything. The most important thing is, can it identify where the gaps are?
Yeah.
Because even if it just says, hey, there's SSO connected to this. Okay.
I mean, for me and you, that we know where to go, right?
Right, exactly. We know where to go. We can, at a minimum, it's like, hey, auditor, you need to get some more information here because they told you something has access and they haven't given you the full picture. Go get that extra information, right? So, like, to me, that's already a step forward.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of, I mean, how many times have you, like, you know, all engineers have experienced it. They go and they inherit this like monstrous amount of AWS accounts, and you're like, I don't even know how to like begin to unwind everything, right? Like, we're just doing it for cross account and access.
Right.
Like, we could totally adopt this prompt and say, map it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if you were to think about this like in more of a real world scenario, and again, maybe assuming organizations because that's the most common approach, start with that. Give me your root account. And we're going to use organizations to go find all the accounts and look for ones that are production and make sure that there aren't things that have access to your production accounts that shouldn't.
Yep.
Find anything new here?
So it's interesting. I don't know that we have any policies that have it.
No, we probably don't. So let me create something.
It would be interesting to create one because it definitely knows the account. It called it out and said 83192, this is the account and this is the account cross access that it is. But it only has seen AWS service linked roles, control tower roles, and AWS SSO roles, which means like there's probably not a cross account role out there.
We're going to create one right now. I'm going to give it some kind of read only access. I hate the way they do this.
This is one of the reasons too that everyone was like so hyped about computer use, and I was like, dude, it's been able to do computer use forever. It just could do it programmatically, and which is so much more powerful. Like, just like there's so many use cases that like if we were to go write the code to do this, to scan the environment, we would have had to literally go through and say, you know, all these if statements and all the commands and a systematic like approach, and like it would have taken like hours or days even to like create all the rules and rule engines to like manage that.
Yeah, even just figuring out what things to look for, like I can go and figure out the list of things, but it just did it.
Oh, look at that. Summary of external accounts with access to your account via test cross account role, via an organizational account role, and via a control tower administration execution role. That's insane.
Yeah. That's so cool, right? Like right there, all of a sudden, I'm able to say these are the accounts that have access to this account. So now, if I'm auditing this account, I can be like, okay, well, I need to see those accounts too.
Yeah, like it's really simple at that point.
It makes the scoping so much easier.
Yeah, like it's just give us a read only. In fact, they have managed policies for audits and security, right?
Exactly.
Like, just give me a cross account role that lets me do this, and I can tell you exactly what your scope is.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, like honestly, I'm super impressed with that. I think as I was thinking about this, I was just like, man, like I could write some stuff to do a lot of this, but this is incredible. Like and we didn't have to do anything. We spent, like I said, I mean, we're only 30 minutes into this. We spent a little bit of that time just getting up and running.
And most of it is boilerplate.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like we spent a good 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes of that just boilerplating stuff, maybe even more. And now already 30 minutes into this, we've got a list of accounts that have access to this account. Like that's crazy. So I'm curious. Let's go do an S3 bucket. Let's grant some access to something.
Man, if people don't see how this changes like everything.
I know, it's just nuts.
Like imagine if like we had time, right? Like, and we spent the time to create these agents, like, because you can scope these, right? Like I have control of what the tool spec looks like and what the tool can do. Like we could put in there, like, these are your available commands and scope it down to a certain amount of commands and like fine tune the heck out of that prompt. Suddenly, I mean, right now you're basically looking at an AWS scanning agent.
Right.
And it took 30 minutes. And now imagine time associated to it and what you can do.
Yeah.
Like, man, it's exciting. It's exciting and it's scary all at the same time.
All right. Let's see what I can do here. I'm not sure if this policy is right, but I'm going to try it.
And I'm like cheating, right? Because like I'm only doing one tool, and so I'm just automatically assuming tool use uses that function, right?
Yep.
Like I could define multiple tools in this tool spec, and it will tell you which tool it wants to use. And so like you could be hooked up to, even if it was multi-cloud, you could have one function that deals with Azure commands and one that deals with AWS commands and, you know, whatever. Like it's really like the limit is just, can you put together the tool functions that it can call? And then there's obviously like, you know, if we were doing this for real, like we want to make sure that there's like security around it. And we want to make sure that the commands can't like escape and like, you know, this isn't a controlled environment. Like if we were like allowing any type of text to come in, we got to make sure those prompts aren't going to go hijack the systems. But that's another one of those, and for another time, but like the guardrails provided by AWS. And
I do want to play with that up at some point, because I think there's some really interesting stuff that we might get out of that. But all right, let me, almost done with this policy. Again, not sure how good this policy is. Hopefully I'm doing this right. It's been a while since I've had to actually manually edit a policy. It's one of those things where like you start getting spoiled with like CDK, for example. Like, I don't really think about these things.
Yep.
All right. So I've added a policy to one of our buckets that allows get from another account. So we'll see what that does. I still like that. The fact that it just did that get caller identity thing to me was like,
isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Like that it's just like,
yeah, we just told us figure out what account you're in. It's like, oh, you need to know that? Okay. I know how to figure that out. Like, it's one of those things where like, I have to remind people of that.
I know.
Right. Like I've done it enough times to where I remember it. Right. But like, only because I've done it enough times to where I remember it. But I'm like, people are like, oh, how do I AWS STS get caller identity? Oh, okay.
At least 2 external AWS accounts, 147 and
yeah. So that's the one that I did. And so this is an interesting thing too, right? And we've seen this already. It's not consistent in what it's giving us back, right? Like,
well, yeah, we
haven't tweaked it and tuned it to make sure that we get back everything we need. But
actually, that's something that. So there's another trick to that. So if you want structured output, there is the traditional way where you can just say, you know, you
Yeah,
give it the
the
format
prompt
and
yeah.
all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
But that still even has some like quirks to it. One of the other things that you can do is that you could set up a tool and you can say, results, right?
Right.
And like it'll call the result tool with structured, like you've seen that it doesn't call command with
Right.
a bunk command,
Right.
right?
I think that's one of the cool things that like I don't know, I think maybe you pointed out, or at one point in time there was just like that realization, I think even last time we were here, is like we try to do something like, hey, give me this back as JSON or whatever, and most time it does that, but it fails at times. Just adding the tool like forces it.
Yeah, and
It's pretty much always right.
we can do one right here. Well, you can do like account, what do we want to call it? Like report cross account access, right?
Yep.
This tool is used to report cross account access that is different from the host account. And like maybe we want it to do
So here's the trick
the
to it, right?
account
Yep.
and the AWS account number. Maybe we want, I don't know.
The resource, if whatever.
Oh,
like,
resource.
yeah. Is there a way to tell it that something's optional?
Yeah, you just don't put it in the required.
Oh, there you go. Duh. So from the looks of it, this looks very much like Open API spec.
It is.
Okay.
So it's the Bedrock client uses the same. There's some slight nuances on some of this naming,
Yep.
the top level, but everything down, it's actually just using. I forget the name of it, but it's off
JSON
of
schema.
Yum.
Okay. So using Yums. Okay. Interesting.
Like this, it's just a schema.
Schema validator. Yeah.
Yep. And so now we have report cross account access. We'll have to make a little.
Yeah, we'll have to have something in there that
So
tells it to get that.
account access, and that's gonna have, what do we say?
It's count and resource.
String, resource string, and then
Can't have two things with the same name, man. And just push that into that.
optional.
Yep.
And then we'll just do account push. We'll log it just so we can see. Oh, I always forget this one. Tool use ID.
Oh, yeah.
It's super important.
Yep. Because ultimately, we need to make sure that it returns.
Yep.
Doesn't need to promise here, but yeah.
And then we'll need to do return. And then I usually just say account reported or something like that. Why is that complaining?
Because it's an optional. Got to change the order here.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. And then now on
Now
our
we gotta go
if
down
statement,
here. Yep.
if it's tool use, and
Now
I
we
don't
gotta
remember where it tells you that.
Yeah, it's somewhere inside the.
It's in the tool use
Yeah.
block. Not the ID dot name. Okay, so if
Oops.
where'd that
He
go?
just accidentally overrode it.
Name equals. What was the first one that we did?
It is AWS CLI Cloud Scanner dashes between.
Then we want to do that.
Yep.
And then if is that, and there we go. Now we have a dual tool.
Yep.
And so
now what we're expecting to see is, instead of this output like it did before,
and
we're
so
ultimately going to expect to see that it calls into that.
Yep. And it should continually call both functions as it needs.
Yep.
Assuming I didn't mess anything up.
We're doing this live. That couldn't happen.
I suppose I didn't really change the prompt. It'll be interesting to if it figures out that it can use that based off of the description.
That's true. Oh, I wasn't scrolling.
Oh, reporting. Look at that. I just saw one go by. Reporting access.
That's nuts. We didn't even change the prompt.
Nope.
Like, wow.
So here's account access, and it has the resources, the IAM policy, and it has one on the S3 bucket, like you put.
Yep.
So this was to show, like, this is another way of getting structured output from an LLM without trying to rely on your prompt to do it.
Right.
Instead, you focus it into a function.
And then you ultimately have access to that data wherever you need it, right? So like that, I think the coolest thing of this, though, like frankly, was the fact that we didn't even change the prompt, and it was just like, oh, you gave me this new thing to report. I'm gonna use that, and like so, effectively, all we did was we told it what this tool was for, right?
Well,
I mean, I think that's ultimately the point, right?
Yeah, that's what it. You don't technically need to tell the the prompt to use the stuff. Like,
right. You tell it what it's for, and then it figures out, oh, this seems like something that should go there.
And look at what the summary of the findings changed to.
Right.
I mean, you were literally asking, well, I really just want to see what are the two things. And it literally even did the get object that you were talking about. You're like, it has get object now.
Yep.
And like, I mean, how, like, that's insane.
Yeah.
And it does kind of go to show you like how powerful the tool use is, because the prompts don't have to be as like verbose, and like it can figure out which tools to call based off those descriptions.
Right. And like, think about when you were creating those prompts before, one of the things you always had to do is give it a bunch of examples.
Yep.
Don't have to do that anymore.
No.
It's doing it. So to me, this is like super exciting. I love the possibilities here. It's nuts, right? And I know, like, again, like we're talking about this stuff at work all the time, and like what can be done. People are not getting there yet. Like they're just, whenever we talk to people about this, they're just like, oh, we can have it do X or Y. I'm like, you are not thinking big enough. Yeah, we can do so much more.
Well, I mean, people don't get to see these things, right?
Exactly.
Like they're just interacting with a chatbot,
right?
And like, it's interesting. It definitely knows a lot, but like,
and it has good uses. Right? Yeah, there's value we're getting out of it there too. But like, I think what's interesting here, like, ultimately we're creating something that goes beyond just a chatbot. But if you think about, like, I think we talked a little bit about this with like the computer use or the whatever the browser one that.
Yeah, browser use. Yep.
Yeah.
Operator.
Yeah, operator. Where under the hood, this is all it's doing.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's looking at a page. It's like, okay, there are buttons on here. You wanted me to do something. I'm going to look where the button is, and it's going to be like, oh, I need to move my mouse to this position and click it.
Yeah, in fact, the computer use is literally a tool that takes an image.
Exactly.
And it does X and Y coordinates.
Yeah.
And so all it does is it loops, and it says, the LLM says, okay, I want to move my mouse, over X over Y. It calls the move function.
Yep.
And then it calls the click function.
Right.
Like, and that's it. Like,
right. And so effectively what we're talking about doing here, and like this isn't rocket science, right? But we're basically just saying, hey, look, we have some structured things that we want to accomplish, that we know what to do when we get to this point. So have it call code that we write, so we're not having to have clicks and stuff, right? Because I think it's an important thing, right? We've talked about this a lot. I don't know if we talked about it on here, where like the future is agent to agent,
Yep.
right? And I'm going to just move this from the screen for a bit. The future is agent to agent. And so, like, operator's cool, right? I think it opens doors in a lot of places where people just weren't seeing that vision. And it also opens possibilities where getting an agent on the other side is going to be a lift that we can't get to in the short run. Great. I think there's a huge value in things like operator and computer use. But the reality is, getting rid of that UI, that's the answer.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it really is.
Why do I need to have somebody log into some UI to do something when an agent should just talk to another agent and figure things out?
Well, imagine if we took this exact same thing, and we changed the prompt to say, you are agent on behalf of this customer,
Right.
and you need to answer any type of security or compliance questions that you might have. And here are the tools that you have. You have access to AWS CLI Cloud Scanner.
Yep.
It would go, like, you could ask it, does it have any cross-account access? And it would go through the same thing and say, yes, I have an IAM role and an S3 bucket.
Yeah. Do you have any S3 buckets that have public access?
And so now it's
just
like,
go look. Right.
now it just becomes agent to agent. So like, imagine all of this stuff, like all of the cross communication type things that we did in the past, or all those platforms that would like do all this like routing back and forth and all this stuff. It won't exist. It'll be, here's our agent. How does our agent talk to your agent?
Yep.
And they're just going to go back and forth until they get the outcome.
Right.
And whether it be good or bad, like it might report back that, hey, like they're not secure or whatever.
And like, I think the thing that scares people, of course, this is like, in some ways reasonably scary, right? Because there's so much power here. The thing that scares people is like, well, not just am I going to lose the job, but like, am I creating a situation where chaos can happen because there was nobody in the middle? One of the things we've been talking about is the key here is figuring out what points in that communication process to introduce a human. Right.
Exactly.
And it's not that humans should not be involved. It's that we want to reduce the points of human contact down to the points where they really truly add value. And, it's scary, but at the same time, it's freeing, right? Like you look back over the course of, back to the times where robotics kind of came into play and started doing manufacturing stuff. Did people lose jobs? Yes. Did we overall move forward? Yes, right. Costs start coming down and other opportunities open up. And so like, it's going to be a shift. There's no question about it. But this to me is exciting.
Well, and I think it's like we as engineers wielding these tools have to be thinking in that manner of like keeping the humans in the loop, because it's very easy. Like it's very easy for somebody to just say, oh, I'm going to just let it run automated and like never have anyone touch it. Right.
Yep.
And like, that's not the right answer either. Like even using our very basic example, like maybe the follow on is it sends an email to the security guy and like on a weekly basis of like, hey, these are your cross account.
Yeah. Go look at these and fix it. Yeah.
But like, if you were to do that and say, ask an engineer to do that on a weekly basis, that's a lot of work.
Sure. To have to go figure that out.
Yeah. You had this agent doing it on a weekly basis and they're getting to the important information and decision points faster.
Right.
And that's where the value is. And that's where our responsibility is that we need to raise up and say, we need to be thoughtful on where human in the loop is.
I think this, you actually made me think of a really perfect example of where adding the human can be critical, right? So if you were to just be like, hey, agent, we found this problem, and it's like, oh, we'll go fix it. Imagine what happens when you go turn off that access and it was actually needed to be there.
Yeah.
Right. So like really the human comes in and is like, oh, that looks bad. Or that's okay. Here's why. And we get that as part of the context that it understands. Now, the next time it sees it, it understands it's okay. Here's what it's okay for. Here's the limited scope. But if you just let the computer do it, it'd be like, yeah, shut it off.
Yeah.
Right. And then like your application, like, and it's really where people have struggled with automation for remediation is that the moment you introduce remediation automation into the scope, you've turned it into where like bad things can happen because you weren't ready for it. So
We're going to put it to the test. So I added a final line. It says, finally, give recommendations using CloudFormation change sets to fix any issues that you find. So it can't actually run it.
right.
But like, I'm curious, like
Yeah.
what it will say. And like, it could potentially be like, run these change sets to take away this access. And
Yeah.
then like, it'd be interesting because I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's like, hey, like, you can't just let it run automated like
Right.
willy-nilly. Like there has to be that command and control that sits over it and says, hey, like this is okay, or
Right.
we need this. It's an acceptable risk. It's
Exactly.
whatever.
Yep.
Oh, look at that. See?
Yeah.
It would have, like, its recommendation was to remove
Yep.
the test cross account.
Which, I mean, frankly, that's a good call, but
So you could remove it, or, oh, I do like this.
Yeah.
It does say,
if
or
it's needed,
if it's needed, but without cross account access, replace it with this.
yeah. So interesting.
That's kind of cool. Didn't really know what to do. Didn't give the S3 bucket one, though.
Yeah, it didn't.
And it didn't even, actually, it didn't catch that one because it didn't report it in the account access. So it didn't get the S3 bucket. It didn't go as deep on the S3 bucket that time around.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is where like there are some limitations. Probably some of it in the way we're using it, right? Like ultimately,
Yeah, I'm not-
look at that cloud control. It's got pagination, and is it doing that? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But yeah, at the end of the day, like to me, again, if I was to step back on this and like actually try to productionize this, I would write those calls directly and not have it, calling the CLI, right?
Oh,
'Cause,
yeah.
and so then I got a little bit more control. I'm like, hey, tell me the resource types I should be looking at, whatever. But the point here is it got here on its own.
Yeah. Well, we're doing rudimentary exec commands, right?
Exactly.
This is TypeScript code. I could
Right.
have pulled in the AWS libraries
Well, that's
themselves.
exactly my point, right? So like if I were to do this for real, I would have pulled in the library and said, here's the cloud, a thing that does cloud control, and here's the parameters I expect from you. The
Yep.
type that I'm getting, whatever it is, and then I'll give that back to you and take that and figure out what you need to know from it. Like I think there's different steps to get there that would make it more robust, more complete, make it more accurate on a regular basis. But this was cool.
Yeah. And to kind of finish it out, you'd been asking a lot about, hey, they have agents
Yep.
in Bedrock. Like, what's the difference? And
Yep.
like, how do we do one of those? We don't really have the time right now to do the full code version of it, but we can at least walk through one.
Yeah, let's do it.
And so basically it's just agent quick start. This is actually really interesting, and I will have to like probably look into this
Yeah.
at a different time, but there's multi-agent collaboration. So it basically creates the connection to talk to each other.
Yep.
But when you're creating one of these, you're basically setting up a execution role, which is just so it can run Bedrock.
Yeah.
You select what model. Pretty typical. You give it its instructions. So that's like what we did on that first prompt, right?
Yep.
Like, so it's like you are code scanner. You are a scanner of AWS, right?
Yep.
And so good. So action groups is where it gets more interesting. So those are basically functions that it can call.
Yep.
In this case, it's Lambda functions, or there's basically return controls. Those are a little bit more complex, but we would basically either define function details, or we can specify a Lambda or API gateway and define a schema to specify the APIs that agents can invoke, which is really cool.
Yeah, but this is basically the same thing that we're doing inside the tool use stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But at the Lambda level, right?
Yeah, I mean, here it is. So here's define an inline schema editor, and we're using the open API.
Yep.
And we're telling it, here's the path to claims. So get all open claims. And it's basically the exact same thing, right?
Yep.
Like you're just telling it what APIs it can get, which is actually really cool. Because imagine putting an agent in your platform, right? And you already have all these REST APIs.
Right.
Well, you can just output your open API spec and say, hey, here's
Here you
all the
go. Here's how
APIs
to
that
get
you have
everything.
access to, right?
Yeah.
And so you can create Lambda functions and do all that good jazz. I don't know what I clicked, but that's the action groups. They also have memory allocation, so it can retain its conversational context, and you can tell it how long. We've been showing stuff at the lower level, right? And we're managing the memory. We're managing those message blocks where we're pushing stuff on. That's the memory. Well, this can handle that for you. So this is a step above. And there's the trade-offs, right? You say 30 days and 20 sessions. You don't know how they're chunking the memory and stuff, but it gets you to it pretty easily. You can also put
knowledge bases.
Yep.
So that's where you get your RAG stuff, right? Where you're
all the RAG. Yep. And then you can also do the guardrails. You can also do your orchestration strategy, and then you can also do collaborators. And so the way that I look at collaborators, so I created a little LinkedIn poster that makes LinkedIn posts. Well, one of the agents does the post, and it talks to another agent that I created that proofreads it, and they talk back and forth to basically refine the LinkedIn post. And so that's a pretty basic agent to agent communication within the multi-agent collaboration space. But yeah, pretty simple to set up. And you can even go through their assistant and tell them what you want it to do, and it will set it up.
And well, guess what that's using? AI. I think for what we're trying to demonstrate today, obviously the tool use, that's easier for us to kind of get it up and running, right? We can do it really quickly. I think if I'm thinking about where I would want to go with this for a lot of cases, not all, because I think to your point, having more control of it is quite often really valuable, but a lot of cases I'd be yeah, let's do this. Especially if you, like you said, you've got APIs that are already out there.
If it was an API that was already out there, if it was a knowledge base, this is so much easier to get up and running. We have use cases where we have obviously there's huge amounts of documentation around audits and tax. One of the really cool things, and something that I desperately want to try at one point, is they have these auto loading knowledge bases. So you can shove everything in S3. You tell it what the knowledge, you give it a name and all that good jazz. But what really is interesting is the next page, because you can basically say, where's the data source in S3? You tell it where it is, and then you can tell it how to parse it all. And so you can do foundational models as the parser. There's basically, if you go past this, I don't know. I think I gotta choose something. I just want to get to the next part.
Change that. Yeah, I was gonna say change that back to.
This is where I think it's really interesting. Is they offer a way to take S3 unstructured data and create a graph RAG, which is the next gen of everything. Because if you've worked with vector embeds, they're great, but it's still relying on k-nearest neighbor. This is something that is
yeah, I'll be very curious to see how good it does, right? Because graphs are challenging to create, but again, LLMs are probably going to do a pretty good job of figuring out that stuff. So
Yeah, and in fact, you even had asked, you're like,
Yep.
how does it make the reg? And it
Yep.
tells you right here
Yep.
that it will use Claude Haiku to generate your graph to load the Neptune analytics database, which is just nuts. Like
Yep.
to me, I'm just like, wow. Like I definitely want to see that in action.
Yep.
And they have like their own embedding models,
Yep.
and like some people will be like, oh, well, the embedding model, I've never seen one of the embedding models like differ greatly. Like
Right.
you can get away with using Titan and save yourself some bucks. Like
Right. Right.
you don't need OpenAI's embedding model.
Yeah. And again, like, okay, maybe you do at some point, but start without
Sure.
it. Always start without it. Go the cheapest, easiest route. Start. I think that's something I'm generally across all engineering. Start easy, start simple, and change when you need to. Well, cool. That was actually really cool and fun. Yeah, this week we were obviously a little off our schedule. TJ was a little sick last week, so we took the week off. But we'll get back on to every 2 weeks. 2 weeks from today will be our next one. But thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night, everybody.